Greetings, Onimusha warriors. This is a dark night if there ever was one. As the rain continues to fall and new evils dance around us, our only hope is to expand our repertoire of occult wisdom. And to discover such esoteric knowledge, one must be daring and one must be hungry. And that, of course, is why you've joined us tonight. If this is your first time joining us, allow me to introduce this certain someone walking beside us. They'll be joining us tonight as we continue to explain the unexplainable. Last time, we journeyed far back into feudal Japan to uncover the devilish undertones of Oda Nobunaga across his numerous pop culture adaptations. This helped bridge our understanding between his demonic depiction in Onimusha and his historical reputation as the Devil King of the Sixth Heaven. Be sure to view this analysis first, as it establishes how Onimusha cleverly remixes real historical happenings in feudal Japanese history. And along with the historical reimaginings, Onimusha injects the paranormal, namely with its diverse array of grisly beasts. Tonight, we will further examine those monstrous entities and their ties to classic Japanese demon lore. We shall hike up Mount Oe, into the very birthplace of the quintessential Oni folktale, the tale of Shuten-Doji. This tale and many others can greatly enhance our understanding of the various demons in the Onimusha series. Many of Onimusha's symbols and folklore characters have crucial ties to today's syncretistic repertoire of Japanese demon lore. Historical depictions of the Oni have continually evolved as a result of multiple cultural and religious influences being molded from various deities of Shinto, Buddhist, and Indian backgrounds. Raiko writer's book, Japanese Demon Lore, Oni from Ancient Times to the Present, serves as an indispensable resource for tonight's analysis. Some of Onimusha's most tasteful implementations of Oni lore include its many classical demons and yokai, its many inspirations from Japanese Buddhism, magical Oni weapons, and many others. There is so much to be explored tonight. I can only hope that our guest doesn't get too excited. Let us begin. Brace yourself, as this one's going to get sinister. To explain the origins of Onimusha's demons and Oni, as well as the folkloric motifs that pervade Onimusha's narrative, we'll be hiking to Mount Oe. The Oeyama mountain range is the birthplace of perhaps the most renowned and iconic folktale in all of Japanese Oni lore, the tale of Shuten-Doji. This tale establishes numerous classical trademarks of Oni that would endure for centuries to come, despite the ever-evolving depictions and roles of the Oni. But before diving into this tale, we must lay the foundation for what exactly the label Oni entails. While the term Oni remains ambiguous and defies any precise parallel to Western or European monsters, the term ogre is often thought to be the closest available parallel to describe the Oni in one word. Yet, ogre fails entirely to encapsulate the many nuances that distinguish an Oni from any other demon or hellish type of creature. And speaking of hell, perhaps the best way to contextualize the original conception of the Oni is through the lens of Buddhist hell. The Oni's prototypal image came to Japan through the spread of Buddhism, which eventually seeped into China after its birth in India, and therefore, Buddhist influences on the Oni are critically significant. In Buddhist hell, there exists a hierarchy of otherworldly creatures, essentially Buddhist Oni, that terrify, torture, and devour mortal sinners. Among these Buddhist Oni are cannibalistic creatures of Indian origin, such as the Yasha and Rosetsu. In their original Indian forms, both of these creatures share a penchant for human blood and flesh with the Oni. But eventually, Buddhism adopted these beings into its pantheon of deities that defend Buddhist law and feast on mortal sinners. They are essentially conceptual predecessors of the Oni, perceived as notably vicious when introduced to Japan. Hence, they were incorporated into Japanese culture as a type of Buddhist oni. The yasha in particular follow a hierarchical order, with the low-class yasha remaining in hell to become oni. These lower-class yasha serve the higher class and are sometimes called jaki, or evil oni, that punish mortal sinners. These evil oni are often seen being stepped on by higher-class yasha at Buddhist temples, which brings us to the higher class of yasha. Many of these deities are destined to serve critical functions in the Buddhist cosmos, and the highest tier of such beings are the Shuten-no. The Shuten-no, or 4 heavenly guardians, ultimately rule over all yasha beneath them. The chief of these 4 is Vice Ravana, also known as Bishamonten, god of war. And of course, it's no coincidence just how relevant Bishamonten is to the heroes of Onimusha. We're just getting started. Keep this hierarchy of high-class Shuten-no and lower-class evil oni in mind for later. But for now, let's proceed to the next key element in understanding the oni's conception, the Japanese and Chinese characters for oni. After centuries of molding, this Japanese character now represents oni. Analyzing its contextual uses can help us gain a more holistic understanding of how different cultures interpreted the oni. In Chinese, the character now means invisible spirit of the dead, both ancestral and evil, and the character mimics the shape of a dead body at burial during the Yin Dynasty. So at its core, the character represents a dead body itself. In Japanese folklore, kami are defined as powerful spirits of nature that are greatly respected, while the mono are similar nature spirits that are universally feared rather than respected. Oni are similar spiritual beings to these malignant mono. Mono, as used in terms like mononoke, or evil spirits, can sometimes be interpreted as a formless, shapeless energy that negatively affects humans, often invisibly. And the same character for oni was rendered as mono in several examples before the 10th century, so its influence on the oni is undeniable. That being said, the formless image of the oni would remain formless and shapeless. That is, until the influence of various supernatural beings from the Buddhist pantheon. These include the aforementioned Yasha and Resetsu of Indian origin, as well as the Chinese beings known as Gui Shen, which roughly translates to ghosts and spirits. The conceptual prototype of the oni would then emerge as an amalgamation of these ghastly creatures of the Buddhist pantheon. These beings would offer a form to the formless oni, making the invisible visible. In and after the 10th century, the Japanese character for oni would become increasingly popular. Over time, the Japanese consciousness would assimilate this more palpable image of the bloodthirsty oni into their literature and art, in place of the previously shapeless oni. The iconic trademarks of the oni would then materialize and evolve over time. But before we dive into these defining characteristics and their uses in Onimusha, let's examine some of the invisible oni's depictions in early Japanese literature. Some early literature on Japanese Buddhist tradition used the oni character to define mysterious messengers from the netherworld, while other stories use it to describe invisible or marginalized strangers who live outside the emperor's domain. The association of oni with unexplainable occurrences and invisible outsiders is very apparent and recurring. In past analyses, we've examined many horrid entities that emerge from biological and paranormal means, such as the bioweapons of Resident Evil and the corrupted Qlipoth tree of Devil May Cry. But to interpret the oni in the context of medieval Japan, we need not necessarily venture into the biological nor the paranormal. The oni exist all around us, often invisibly, in that they are granted substance and credibility through the sharing of people's accounts and lived experiences. This concept of speaking an otherwise nebulous entity into reality is characteristic of many Japanese yokai and spirits. In some of its earliest uses, the term oni has been used to assign a concrete, physical body to an otherwise intangible figure or occurrence, often in a morbid context of intense violence, murder, or cannibalism. For example, Ryder describes early appearances of the invisible oni in a handful of classical folktales, all of which are of the same general archetype and premise of a lower-class man falling in love with a beautiful woman, typically the daughter of an aristocratic family. Keep this recurring theme in mind for later, as it is cleverly incorporated into Onimusha. In one of these tales, the man wins among other male suitors and marries the woman of higher class. The newlywed girl is heard crying in agony from her bedroom, but her parents justify it by her lack of sexual experience. The next morning, all that remains of the girl is her severed head and one lone finger. Upon discovering the crimson remnants of the girl, they claim it to be the work of an oni. A similar tale tells of a man who kidnaps a woman, who is once again of a much higher status than him, and runs off with her. But a nasty thunderstorm forces them into a shelter, and while guarding the entrance to the shelter, the man hears a stifled cry from the woman, just as the thunder booms outside. As his eyes dart towards her faint plea, she is gone, and though no one actually sees an oni in this tale either, her death is once again attributed to an oni. Tales like these illustrate the lightning-quick nature of an oni's brutal aggression, which Ryder expresses as oni in one gulp. Even though these folktales describe the invisible oni before its more tangible depictions, they reveal the building blocks of the archetypal oni folktale, especially the second tale, a male outsider of the lower class, often living outside of the established authorities' sight and of selfish disposition, seeking the hand of a noble woman of unmatched pulchritude, perhaps a princess. He coerces the woman into his own hands, only for her to disintegrate in a lightning-quick strike of fate, by the hand of a creature that no one actually witnessed, yet that everyone would learn to believe in and fear. The tales also introduce our first two defining characteristics of oni, the aforementioned cannibalism and the recurring association with lightning and thunder. And for Onimusha veterans, the kidnapping of a princess trope sounds awfully familiar already. But let's save this for tonight's main event. For now, let's address two more defining attributes of the Japanese oni, namely in regards to its appearance, the oni's iconic tiger skin trousers and ox horns. According to Ryder, these attributes were derived from a play on the word ushitora, with ushi meaning ox and tora meaning tiger. Ushi represents a cardinal direction 30 degrees east from due north, and tora is a direction 30 degrees north from due east. Ushitora was deemed a sinister or ill-fated northeasterly direction known as Kimon, or Oni's Gate, and thus, ox horns and tiger skins are used to depict Oni. And what of the iron clubs, you ask? Well, we covered how in most Oni depictions, they are accompanied by flashes of lightning and thunder, and are more so linked to these than any other element, and this may be why. There are some pre-10th century texts that often describe man-eating one-eyed beasts with the aforementioned Japanese character for the Oni. Many speculate that such grotesque imagery was used to describe foreigners, namely the Chinese or Koreans that first brought metalwork to Japan. This is yet another instance of metaphorically illustrating the Oni as the marginalized outsider, someone geographically and socially isolated from the masses, someone who falls outside the criteria of normalcy and familiarity, who would serve as a basis for Japanese artists and writers to portray them in such a dark, dreary, almost Kafkaesque fashion as this. And perhaps that demonization of the secluded, foreign blacksmith with a hammer inspired the iron mace or club in the hand of the monstrously deformed Oni. And on top of this, the sparks produced from metalwork and blacksmithing resemble lightning, which probably influenced the Japanese to assign the power of lightning to the Oni. Perhaps the most traditional iron weapon of the Oni is the kanabo, a Japanese studded iron club. Though intended as a dual-handed weapon, many Oni flail and bash their victims using just one arm, perhaps to showcase their brutish strength. Despite these conventional depictions of Oni, keep in mind that these creatures also possess an almost boundless ability to shapeshift, manifesting in whatever form they desire, which includes size and gender-shifting abilities, often to deceive unsuspecting victims. Now that the Oni's origins, defining characteristics, and abilities have been established, the scene is set. Let us dive into Onimusha's many evils and their connections to classical Oni lore. It is time. Well, maybe not for the main event just yet. But Mount Oe is in sight, and one must be truly hungry to make it this far. For that, I applaud you and our special guest. Before diving into the tale of Shuten-Doji, let's gather all of our learning to assess some of the Oni and yokai-inspired demons in the world of Onimusha. First up is Osric.
I haven't eaten in a while.
I'd like to mention here that Osric, much like Guildenstern, has the Shakespearean name from Hamlet with almost no relation at all. More importantly, Osric's appearance is adorned by numerous traditional characteristics of Oni, including the red skin, 2 ox horns, cavernous voice, brutish teeth, and giant kanabo club as discussed earlier, which he wields effortlessly, using just one beefy arm. It's also crucial to note his 3 fingers and toes, which is reminiscent of many prototypal depictions of the Oni, as well as some later depictions. Osric does not sport the classic trousers, but we do see trousers on many of the other Oni, namely these gargantuan Ushi Oni, with yellow and red skin. There are many variations of Ushi Oni, which translates to Ox Oni, but these have a humanoid body and an ox's head and horns, and are essentially the Japanese equivalent of a minotaur. They wield a huge axe, again a club-like weapon forged from iron. And speaking of Ushi Oni, I'd like to introduce one of my personal favorites next, but first, let's establish another timeless motif in Oni literature: their recurring association with wealth and prosperity, especially via wish-granting mallets. These mallets are present in numerous classical stories, and by the 13th century, this mallet would be a customary tool of the Oni. Take the tale of Little One-Inch, for example. An elderly couple gives birth to a child who never grows larger than just 1 inch. One day, he falls in love with the daughter of a noble family, of course, and tricks the family into disowning her. 1 inch cares for her thereafter, and in one of their travels, 1 inch gets devoured by an Oni. But despite the peril of his situation, he fought back bravely from within the Oni's belly, thrusting his sword deep into its stomach, and he was then regurgitated from the Oni's mouth, and the demon slunk away. It left behind a magical wish-granting mallet, which Little One Inch used to grow to the size of a normal human. The mallet then created food and treasures for him and his wife, making them rich. Today, this mallet is most commonly recognized in the portrayal of Daikokuten, one of Japanese 7 fortune deities, and it is often speculated that the Oni's mallets influenced this portrayal. Bearing this in mind, Onimusha 2's Gingham Fats is most accurately classified as an Ushi Oni, this time with the torso of a blue-skinned Oni and multiple ox legs but with wickedly sharp hooves. A similar variant of Ushi Oni exists in Monster Girl's encyclopedia, with the same hybrid of legs and torso. Gingham Fat's huge axe is essentially a revival of this wish-granting mallet, as every one of his strikes conjures up a sizable chunk of gold during his first feud with Jubei. And when he is slain, he leaves behind a huge stash of gold in his place, and several more in the gold mine's rooms behind him. Next, let's examine some of the female yokai in Onimusha, this time not an Oni. Heikuba, from Onimusha Warlords. She is most closely identified with Kamakiri Onna, or Mantis Woman. A Kamakiri Onna's usual modus operandi is to disguise yourself as a beautiful woman, which again is characteristic of many Oni and yokai, and then mutate into the hellish being we see here. In Inuyasha, this exact scenario occurs.
Will you do me the honor?
I should have known this was all far too good to be true.
The character Miroku spots a beautiful woman amongst a crowd and pursues her, only to witness her mantis malformation a moment later. Heikuba in Onimusha does precisely that as well, feigning her allegiance to Princess Hatsu and acting as an ally to the two captives, Yuki and Yumemaru. Later on, she abducts Yumemaru, and when confronted by Samanosuke, morphs into a ghastly mantis woman, a Kamakiri Onna. In the opening CGI movie of Onimusha 1, a praying mantis actually mimics Heikuba's attack by flailing at Princess Yuki from a distance. Onimusha 2's Juju Dorma is another female demon that deceives people with her appearance. Due to her old age, hag-like appearance, and lair set deep in the mountains, she can be considered a Yama-uba, or mountain ogress. It's fascinating, yet distressing, just how heavily a female yokai's role is influenced by her appearance. In Onimusha Blade Warriors, Juju Dorma is a younger, more desirable form of herself and a playable hero, but as her uglier, elderly demonic version, she is a delusional, murdering hag. The depictions of Yama-uba are ever-evolving in literature, but the hideous and violent characteristics are recurring, as Yama-uba often personify old age, infertility, ugliness, and a desire for human flesh, like the Oni. Many of Onimusha's lesser evils are original creations and more generic in their design, such as the low-level zombie Genma and these level 2 zombies in the form of reptile Genma. Then there exist some other creatures, hybrids of classical elements in Capcom's imagination. Gore is another low-ranking demon with 3 fingers and an iron mace, which still draws from the Oni's early image. These water creatures resemble Japanese ningyo, which can be thought of as the Japanese mermaid or rusalka, but rather than a human female upper body, they have a more fleshy, corrupted appearance. While there are a couple more I'll mention during the main event, this covers most of the Oni and yokai in Onimusha that have direct ties to classical yokai and Oni folklore.
Thank you for staying.
We have arrived at the very birthplace of the quintessential Oni folktale. Quite a wealth of classic Oni lore we've studied on our way. Our special guest is trembling with tears of excitement, and aren't you too? Well then, let's dive into this tale and its fascinating parallels to Onimusha's narrative. The tale of Shuten-Doji, originally Oeyama Ekatoba, in its oldest extant form, essentially has 2 versions, the Mount Oe and Mount Abuki versions, but the core storyline remains the same across both. This tale adopts many recurring motifs of the classical Oni folktales from earlier, but stands out as a popular amalgamation of real historical figures and fictional embellishments. Originally, the story was inspired by a relentless chain of natural calamities at the tail end of the 10th century, such as typhoons, famines, and pandemics. in which the people of Kyoto would disappear and die. But much like in the earlier tales, these misfortunes were attributed to the marginalized outsider living out of the emperor's reach, the Oni, of course. This injection of the supernatural into the historical, much like Onimusha itself, yields a very unique fusion of narratives. In short, here's the basic premise of Shuten-Doji. During the reign of Emperor Ichijo, people of Kyoto mysteriously start to disappear, of all social classes, high and low. Abe no Seimei, a specialist in Onmyodo, or yin-yang cosmology, divines that the Oni overlord Shuten-Doji has been abducting and feasting on Kyoto's residents. In response, Ichijo commands 2 highly esteemed generals to slaughter Shuten-Doji and save the abductees, Raiko no Minamoto and Fujiwara no Hosho. And using their wits, their blades, and the aid of several side characters, our heroes triumph over the evil Shuten-Doji. Now, step by step, let's examine the finer details of this tale through the lens of Onimusha. Much like this tale and the earlier Oni folktales, Princess Yuki of the Saito clan is kidnapped by the demons in Onimusha 1. The beautiful daughter of an aristocratic family is abducted by male outsiders. Here's that trope again, in the form of Princess Yuki being kidnapped so that Nobunaga can drink her precious blood. Keep him in mind. And Yuki's letter mimics the premise of Shuten-Doji very closely, saying, "I fear that it might be the work of monsters. I am so scared. People tell me that the monsters eat the maids and servants and then take their remains to some place deep underground." Maids and servants implies that much like the tale of Shuten-Doji, the demons kidnap Yuki, other wealthy maidens, and their servants alike, irrespective of their social status. But once again, the focal point remains on the noble princess, and we'll build on this more later. The deep underground and Inabayama Castle of Onimusha 1 parallel Mount Oe's rock caves and the palace compound of this tale, respectively. The theme of humans as food is omnipresent in this tale, just as it is in Onimusha. The exposition parallels are set. Now, onto the 2 main hero figures, Minamoto no Raiko and Fujiwara no Hosho. Right off the bat, we should note that these 2 historical heroes and their roles are heavily influenced by their legacy and reputation over time. Raiko remains the dominant hero, reprising his role as an Oni conqueror across many, many tales that would follow. According to Noriko Rider, Hosho's legendary status diminishes as time passes, which would leave most of the glory to Raiko and his men. Due to a lack of historical details on Raiko's conquests, writers would edify his feats and his legacy with their own imagination. Raiko and his Shitenno, or 4 guardian kings that accompany him, claim most of the praise in this timeless story, and coincidentally, they, along with Shuten-Doji himself, hold the strongest parallels to Onimusha. So now that our heroes and our villains have been established, pay very close attention to how they are portrayed in the lens of the Buddhist cosmos. Earlier, I mentioned the second version of this tale, the Mount Ibuki version. Though the bulk of the narrative is the same, there are 2 main additions along with the location change. The first is the explanation of Shuten-Doji's Honji, meaning original form or true nature. Our villain's Honji is none other than Dairokuten no Mao, or the Devil King of the 6th Heaven, and the archenemy of Buddha himself. Last time, we discovered Mount Hiei's Tendai Buddhist sects, known as the Iko-Iki, and they pinned the same title of the Devil King of the 6th Heaven on Nobunaga, especially after his Mount Hiei massacre, in which the Enryaku-ji monastery was set ablaze by the Oda troops. Originally, there was a local deity belonging to Mount Hiei, but the deity was deemed an Oni by Saicho, the founder of Tendai Buddhism. This exiled deity was Shuten-Doji himself, and given the Tendai Buddhist strong-linked imperial authority, Shuten-Doji was forced to leave Mount Hiei. What a wild connection. Shuten-Doji was exiled from Mount Hiei, deemed as archenemy of the Buddha, and the Devil King of the 6th Heaven, and the same monastery would be violently razed by Oda Nobunaga, earning himself the same title. This parallel only grows stronger the more we look into the 2. There's more to this, but first, let's get to our heroes. As for Raiko's Honji, or true form, it is none other than Bishamonten himself. chief of the Shuten-No Guardians, as discussed earlier. And you could probably guess how this applies to Samanosuke already. Samanosuke effectively parallels Raiko no Minamoto in this story as chief protagonist. Raiko himself, much like Samanosuke, is imbued with supernatural, demonic power of the Oni. In the Edo period of Japan, the period in which the tale was written, extraordinary abilities were often rationalized with ties to the supernatural. Raiko is granted godlike power through his connection with the thunder god, Raiko, as his very name is a homonym of this deity's name. Very similarly, Samanosuke's very first supernatural Oni power is granted in the form of the thunder sword, Raizan, which literally means thunder/blade. According to Takahashi Masaki, the frightening effects of thunder and lightning were often required to eliminate similarly terrifying demons, as if to imply that only he with the powers of an Oni could dare hope to slay an Oni himself. And an Oni's elemental ability of thunder and lightning is exemplified by Fortinbras, a thunder-wielding hero facing a demon king that also attacks with thunder and lightning. And interestingly, Jubei of Onimusha 2 also harnesses his very first Oni power through the Biryatu, a thunder-imbued weapon. With it, he vows to defeat Nobunaga, who again strikes back with his own thunder and lightning. Both Jubei and Samanosuke harness their extraordinary Oni power with a thunder blade and slay a thunder-endowed demon with it as well, just like Raiko. And since Raiko's Honji, or true form, is Bishamonten, Samanosuke then is the mortal embodiment of Bishamonten, even brandishing the legendary Bishamonten sword itself. Through this same paradigm, the narrative of Oni slaying other Oni is illustrated both through Raiko and Samanosuke. Onimusha differentiates between the supposedly good Oni clan and evil demon or Genma clan, but as we have established through the Oni's origins, the Oni and demons of Onimusha are one and the same, just of different classes and alignments. When the Oni Lord grants Samanosuke power, he explains, "We are the clan of ogres, the Oni, that has been subverted by the demons," which leads to Samanosuke harnessing the clan's Oni abilities to slay other Oni. They are simply called demons or Genma to differentiate classes. Remember the division of Oni in Buddhist hell between the lower class Yasha, or evil Oni, and the divine high class Yasha, or Shuten-No, that punish the lower class. The lower class evil Oni feast on the flesh of mortals. This is why understanding the hierarchy of Shuten-No over lower class evil Oni is so crucial. The punishment of lower class Oni is assigned to Samanosuke and Raiko, as they are agents of the Buddhist pantheon, slaying evil Oni with powers granted to them by the heavenly Oni. The actual translation of Shuten-Doji's picture scrolls starts off by saying, "When the emperor rules his country benevolently, Buddhas and Shinto deities protect his people, responding kindly to their wishes." In this tale, and in Onimusha as well, that protection is issued by endowing heroes with supernatural Oni power. Now, in terms of Raiko's story, his 4 men are also referred to as Shuten-No. Shuten-No typically applies to the 4 heavenly kings of Buddhism, as discussed earlier, but here it also applies to legendary historical retainers in groups of 4, acting as manifestations of the 4 heavenly guardians. It's also fascinating to note that these 4 men, Kintoki, Suetake, Sadamitsu, and Tsuna, also each correspond to a house of the 4 Chinese celestial emblems. These are the azure dragon of the east, the vermilion bird of the south, the white tiger of the west, and the black tortoise of the north. And this famous mural actually appears in this picture puzzle of Onimusha 2, as Jubei pursues Takajo.
It was destiny.
we've established the parallels between Raiko and Samanosuke and their royal obligation of slaying evil Oni by using the power of heavenly Oni. Let's finally get back to the tale, as there's more here in relation to Onimusha. So after Raiko and his men embark upon their journey, they encounter 4 priests, which are also Buddhist deities in disguise. Due to Shuten-Doji's liking of ascetics and spiritual endeavors, they advise Raiko and his men to disguise themselves as Yamabushi, or mountain priests, and provide the necessary garments for our heroes to do so. There still exist numerous Yamabushi sects, and nearly all of them follow a stringent training regimen, but the harshest of practices was taken by the living mummies of Gasan. They progressively decrease their food intake, becoming thinner and thinner, and their bodies shrinking and drying out. In their final moments, they enter a holy chamber constructed underground, sit cross-legged, and chant continuously up until their final breath. Here in Onimusha's entrance to the underground demon chamber lies a mummified priest. If you examine this man as Samanosuke, it even says, "It is unlikely that he is alive." Very tasteful homage to this sect of Yamabushi. Later on in the story, our heroes, now disguised as Yamabushi, approach an old woman who guides them to Shuten-Doji's palace compound. She explains that the Oni king abducts princesses and the wives of nobles, drinks their blood, and feasts on their flesh, again emphasizing the critical role of the princess and Princess Yuki of Onimusha. She also describes a small pious boy and a few maidens confined to an iron cage, very much like the cage that Yuki is held in. This paints a very similar picture to Princess Yuki and Yumemaru being held captive. After this, our heroes proceed into the palace compound of Shuten-Doji and encounter him in his human form. They ask him to provide lodging for the night, and Shuten-Doji obliges. He commands a captive maiden to show the men to the dinner table, but as soon as Shuten-Doji leaves, the maiden begins crying, fearing the ghastly fate that befell the other maidens. Her dialogue is again very similar to Yuki's letter to Samanosuke, which fits perfectly, considering she is crying and pleading to Raiko and his men. She says, "I am in such a miserable state. Shuten-Doji eats anyone whom he dislikes on the spot, calling them his snack. I always worry that today will be my last." After this, the heroes eventually sit down and chat with Shuten-Doji over dinner, some unidentifiable meats in front of them. The Oni king offers a nauseating crimson sake to Raiko, who urges Shuten-Doji to drink first. The demon king then downs 3 cups of this maiden's blood, and here exactly is where Shuten-Doji comes full circle and is parallel to Nobunaga. Just like Shuten-Doji consumes this royal blood of noblewomen, Nobunaga drinks the blood of Princess Yuki in the dark ceremony of Onimusha 1. As we've seen in so many examples now, so many classical Oni motifs run parallelly across Onimusha and the tale of Shuten-Doji. After drinking too much blood sake, Shuten-Doji passes out in a drunken daze, and her heroes enter his bedroom to slice off his head. They free the noble women and pious boy from their tormentors, just like Samanosuke successfully rescues Princess Yuki and Yumemaru. Raiko, his 4 guardians, and Hosho carry Shuten-Doji's head back with them and place it in the treasure house of Uji. Our heroes are then greeted with a thunderous applause from the people, lauding them for their victory over the Demon King. Now, just like the intro to this story, the ending edifies the idea of divine response. The warriors thought, miraculous deities whom we have relied upon and prayed to for a long time have protected us. Doesn't a revelation of divine authority result from men worshipping deities? And this precisely wraps up the entire journeys of our heroes. The quests of Samanosuke and Raiko are indeed divine charges from the heavens above, as they are granted godlike abilities to slay the evil Oni. These tales are rooted in their connections to the divine, to the Japanese Buddhist deities that grant our heroes the power they so require, since once again, only the powers of an Oni could slay a demon king. Only an Oni could dare hope to. The rain is still falling. Our special someone would like to embrace you for joining us on this frightening journey. Tonight, we examined Onimusha's deep-seated connections to classical Oni lore. Its narrative is a dreamlike revival of these classic tales, truly a tasteful hybrid of the historical and the paranormal. The wealth of rich world-building elements is impressive, as there are always more stories to be told. I could talk about Shuten-Doji's parallel to Nobunaga in Onimusha 2, and how the golden evil statue is constructed as a symbol of human greed and selfish desire, which is precisely the MO of the Devil King of the Sixth Heaven, a title pinned to both Shuten-Doji and Nobunaga. I could talk about the Mount Ibuki tale of Shuten-Doji's birth, claiming that he was the son of a giant serpent, the god of Mount Ibuki. Much like Fortinbras the Serpent is the metaphorical father of Nobunaga. There's just so much occult lore to be explored, but one night at a time, another tale, another night. The Onimusha content will continue here and there, but next time, a return to the Resident Evil novels is long due. Caliban Cove awaits us eagerly, and it won't have to wait much longer. My editor and I worked countless hours, day and night, to produce this. Huge thanks to the phenomenal work he's done here. Huge thanks as well to Dakota for these excellent art pieces in both the thumbnail and the video. Special thanks to my supporters on Patreon, Overseer Fear, Zachary Harp, Captain Redfield, Katie Boone, Tina, the one and only W, Pedro C, Mark 5, Andre Novoa, Everlasting Entertainment, Adriel, John the Protagonist, Jareel Moon, Michael Let's Play, John Wick, and Albert Chessa. Your contributions are greatly appreciated, both financially and intellectually. Thank you for supporting the Occult Lore Library. If you'd like a more centralized place for discussion on Onimusha, Resident Evil lore, or otherwise, feel free to join the community Discord. Thank you for watching. That is all. Quite a hike it was tonight, up Mount Oe. Our special guest and I are tired. We shall take our rest, as you should as well. I'll see you again, I'm sure.